Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Bold Explorer reading. It's 4 o'clock here on the 27th, I think it is, of August 2020. And we're continuing with The Wisdom of the Fields reading by H.J. Massingham. Very much enjoying this book at the moment, very much. I'm so pleased that we ploughed being the operative word, or an operative word. With this. Good afternoon to the lovely Julia, lovely to see you, and John F. Hello to you. Just started to rain here in the southeast. I was out this morning doing some filming, and I have edited that. I managed to make 2 films because I've got to be in tomorrow for some deliveries. One of which is my Riverford veg box, so I'm looking forward to that. Hello to Andrew Norris and to Deborah Warren. Good afternoon to you. Thank you very much for joining us. If you are watching and you're able to join into the chat, we do encourage that. That's very kind of you. Diana Rolfe. Hello, Richard, Julia, and chat, she says. And if you enjoy what we do give us a thumbs up. That always helps. Raining hard in East Sussex, is it? Yes, I bet. Good afternoon, Audrey Forbes. Here we go. People coming along, which is marvellous and just as it should be. Yeah, I don't know what it's going to do tomorrow, but I've made an extra video today, which I have yet to edit. I should probably edit that this evening. And whilst I was waiting to get to our reading, I had a little bit of time. Hello, John Willoughby. Says, good afternoon, Richard. How are you? Good afternoon to you. I was reading a little bit from this big tome, Agriculture, the Science and Practice of British Farming. Great big tome of a book, and it was telling me the different types of soil that are used in agriculture, from clay loams, sandy loams, sand, peat, and calcareous. I'm going to have trouble reading it. What is it? I need to see the word. Calcareous. I'm sure it's calcareous. Anyway, chalk, basically. Chalk and what is the other word they used? Not loams. Wold. What did they use? They used an interesting word there. Marls. Yes, marls. Fascinating stuff. Really interesting reading about that. Who would have thought? So James Paulton says he's back from the Great Wen. That's good. Sean James Cameron, no allotment work this afternoon. Rain stopped play. Tried to make a booking on a Riverford, but you can't take out the veg you don't like, so didn't proceed with the order. Presumably you can take the veg out when it arrives. Obviously you still pay for it. So there we go. Anyway, let's crack on with the reading. Thank you if you're listening on the podcast or indeed watching the YouTube after the event. I do appreciate that. And do leave comments. It's always nice when you do that. So, if you remember, he was, I forget where he was now. He was, this Pomona farm that he was raving about, how marvellous this chap was with his farm. And we got to a natural break, and then I think we're still continuing with a little bit more, either this or a different farm, but we'll carry on. Perhaps my choicest discovery on a farm glowing with life and beauty was one of its workers. He was making a gate in the cherry orchard. When he straightened up and walked with long and leisurely strides towards me, I had a sudden revelation of the far away and long ago. I saw W.H. Hudson, risen from the dead. The height, he must have been well over 6 feet. The stoop of the shoulders, the eagle-like Roman nose, the powerful, loosely knit frame, the deep-set eyes, the grizzly hair, the prominent cheekbones, the sternness, and the very shape of the face. This was Hudson, walking along the obscure and dingy passage of the house in St. Luke's Road, Bayswater, to greet me. The man was an old-timer of 74, and the strongest of men, while his air of aloof dignity and reticence was just like Hudson before conservation thawed him. He reminded me too of the other experiences in my own past, the search for rare birds. For the craftsman labourer, the all-rounder who can turn his hand to anything on the farm, the descendant of the dispossessed peasant, the man whose loss can never be compensated by the machine, the patient and the knowledgeable resolver of all difficulties, the hard liver to whom nothing comes amiss, the 12-hour a day, and in my young days the 14-shilling a week man, mower, ploughman, carpenter, shepherd, sower, reaper, horseman, stack builder, stockman, miller, all in turn as occasion needed, this man is now become the rarest of birds. It's funny that use of the word there, this man is now become, because my inclination is to write this man has now become. But it's interesting, this old way of speaking. This man is now become the rarest of birds. He is the neglected infantryman of agriculture, the skilled craftsman on whom a starving world will presently have to depend. On Ponoma Farm, the jobs of this jack-of-all-trades had included tractor driving, well sinking, and water divining. George Henderson, in The Farming Ladder, a book that is currently resting by my bed, I hasten to add, and I have read pretty much the first chapter. It's fascinating. The arrogance and the confidence of him as he approaches his farm was just a joy to read. Anyway, George Henderson in The Farming Ladder has described that he hunted all the villages in the neighbourhood of Enstone in Oxfordshire, Cotswolds, in vain for such a man. Such a man was this Jim Rogers, the spit of the greatest countryman, W.H. Hudson, who is buried in Worthing, not too far from Richard Jefferies, as it happens, and I have visited both those graves. He told me something of his past life, mostly about his part in the old mowing and shearing gangs headed by the Lords. In mowing, he himself used to cut 1.5 acres a day, while 7 like him would mow 10 acres in a day, which a tractor can only accomplish in a day and a half. Probably not so these days, unfortunately. English country was a full land then, not an empty one studded with wens. It was full of human life, not what has been called a population of tractors. Not only had he done all the jobs on the farm, but he used to make milk cheeses that after 2 years' seasoning had to be cut open with a hatchet to get at its creamy contents within. Can you imagine a cheese that you've got to get into with a hatchet? It's just remarkable. Yes, okay, so, but what struck me in particular was his contempt for the money values of the modern farm labourer. His idea was that he was doing worse for £1 what the labourers of 2 generations back had done better for 5 shillings. He himself had earned 14 shillings a week, so he had arrived at the conclusion that none of the present labourers were worth £3 odd a week. This was his way of lamenting the irreplaceable, his elegy on the decline of the skilled labourer. The job was the thing, not what he was paid for. It was good to think that he could work as he chose on this farm, kind in humanity as in land. So in his old age he would escape the fate of being wrenched from it, for the life of a true man of his is work. All day, but especially in the evenings, my host and I would discuss the principles of good husbandry. His wife, who came from an Argentine entancia, lending colour, warmth, and a delicate goodness to the hours. He once wrote to me, "Quality, quality, that should be the aim of all who grow anything, and it is the true organic principles which give richness, the flavour, the goodness, the health." His fields that gave it, his wife that spiritually emanated it, his own grace of character brought the human and the natural into harmony. What is not understood by this generation is the right principles of human society are deeply involved in the meaning of good husbandry. The great trouble that has come upon the world is that it has ceased to know or to cherish any first principles at all. It lives by power, not principles, by ideology, not first causes or natural law. It is a lost world, with the devilish corruption of Germany as its caricature. Bear in mind this was written just as the war had come to an end, I believe. Hello to everybody, by the way, who's just popped in. To John F. say, oh, it's raining, yes. John Willoughby, good afternoon. Cynthia Pate, hello. Mike Stevens, good afternoon to you. Veg box arrived today. Tried the tomato, sweet corn and mushrooms. Taste very nice. My veg box is arriving tomorrow, as it happens, and I'm waiting in for it. Sean James Cameron, no allotment work this afternoon. Oh, rain stop player. Yes, didn't I read that earlier? You tried to make a booking. That's it. Riverhead has a wide variety of different choice of fruit and veg, so you choose what suits you best, says Mike Stevens. Linda Kane is here. Hello to you. Charlie M says, hello, Richard. It's definitely a day to stay in and watch YouTube. There we go. Perfect solution. Ria says, too true. And Mike Stevens says, W.H. Hudson's grave is in the same style as Richard Jefferies, as he was a great admirer of his writing. Yes, it's in the Worthing, or the Broadwater, I should say, the Worthing and Broadwater Cemetery. And I have visited it fairly recently, actually. During lockdown, I visited it. One time I tried to get there with, I'd pulled a muscle in my back, some people may remember, and I didn't make it. It's only about a mile, I suppose, or half a mile or something from my house. I didn't quite make it. And had to hobble home, and then I went there the next day and did it. So that's good. John Stick, hello, driving home from Lewis. I was only on the A27 near Lewis this morning, back up on the Downs I was. John Stick says, hello, not driving and typing. Well done, probably dictating, are you? Linda Kane says, Jeffreys' grave is relatively well kept with plants by the Richard Jeffreys Society. Oh, well, that's very nice, isn't it? Dubai Dozen. What ho! Hello from, I'm sure it's nice and sunny in Dubai. Hudson's is very shady under a conifer, so no grass or plants, just covered with pine needles. A lot drearier. It is drearier, and it's right at the edge, isn't it, as you come in near the gate on the south side. And I did think that it's a shame, because I'm sure really he would like to have been surrounded by all the plants that he wrote about so dearly when he was up on the Downs. And somebody has put that dirty great conifer there where nothing grows underneath, which is a real shame. Being of all men, carrying on with the reading now, being of all men I have ever met being of all men I have ever met, the most skillful dairyman, my host, insisted on the modern era of concentrating on the bull instead of the cow, and incidentally depriving him of his natural functions by the odious automatism of conveying his life force to the cow in a test tube. I assume that means artificial insemination. Is that what he means? The end of quality, since nature's way, is to impregnate the cow with only one, the richest in vitality and speed of the spermatoza. Is the mother of less importance than the father? Or do we imagine that milking machines and pasteurization make our milch cows healthy animals? We waste pots of money on artificial insemination centres, yes, he is talking about that, and are unable to prevent 4/5 of our milking herds from sickness and abortion. Diseased livestock, deteriorating soils, cereals afflicted with 30 different maladies, an emptied countryside, distributors making more than producers, bread with the life germ extracted from it, fruit trees drenched with poison sprays, fresh food a luxury. These are the fine fruits of factory farming. This, written in 1945 or thereabouts, published in 1947 or something like that, 80 years ago. And we've not learnt, and his writing so long ago, a single lifetime. Isn't this the most saddest thing? This is the saddest thing I have ever read. These people who farmed so beautifully and so carefully and with dedication to their animals and the output have been shoved aside for this awful mechanical, highly mechanized industrial world that we're in. It's sometimes it's so difficult to read because the power of the author just comes out in the writing so abruptly, and it hits me here. It just hits me here. What are we doing to ourselves? My goodness, I need to have a. I'm sorry. I want to be born 160 years ago so that I could have my life through that period and taste the quality of food and walk on the downs as they once were before these bastards have torn up those flowers and the wildlife. This is quite difficult to read. Pomona Farm is managing on organic principles. The rule of return is its star. Yet, as I've described, and by the compulsion of war conditions, its farmer winter washes some of his orchards. He has slagged as well as dunged the permanent pastures, used nitrate of soda and potash on the hops and some of the other arable. The measures go against the grain, and he told me he has seen the holocausts of our friends, the worms, by the tar oil, distillates for spraying. For the hops, he could no longer obtain the pit pony manure he used to buy in the railway by truckloads. His conception, and he is a disciple of Sir Albert Howard, was that within reason, which means supplementary to humus, inorganics like Chiltern nitrates, rock phosphates, and muriate of potash extracted from the earth were permissible for short-term mass production of crops, but not synthetic ones. Sulfate of ammonia, for instance, is nothing but a poison. To the list of the earth substances he added lime, potash, and agricultural salt, the last recommended by Cobbett on occasion beneficial. He himself uses very finely ground limestone from Glamorganshire. But great caution and experience are indispensable in the use of these inorganics. Hertfordshire soil, for instance, is limeless, as I could see very well for myself by that path of the Gentiana aculis, which is presumably a plant of some description which I can't bring to mind. But the animals get their lime from the rivers, and the bone of the Hereford cattle is unsurpassed. And what crops this limeless soil produces, how rich the natural vegetation and lofty the timber. My own view, and here I took up his remark about the worms, was that any inorganics used on the soil should be studied in relation to their effect on the bacteria and these earthworms in the soil. If they inhibit the action of these last, or worse, destroyed them, they are worthless and evil farming. For always, and in whatever circumstances, the rule of return was a portion of the natural law must be obeyed. This is what Gilbert White had to say about the lumbricadae, our homely earthworm. Earthworms seem to be the great promoters of vegetation, which would proceed but lamely without them by boring, perforating, and loosening the soil, and rendering it pervious to rains and the fibres of plants, by drawing straws and stalks of all kinds into it. Most of all, by throwing up such infinite numbers of lumps of earth. The earth without worms would soon become cold, hard-bound, and void of fermentation, and consequently sterile. What are these lumps of earth? Darwin, in the formation of vegetable mould by the action of worms with observation on their habits, has unequivocally answered that they are humus, viz. Fertility. They are humus, in other words, fertility. The bones of dead animals, the harder parts of insects, the shells of land molluscs, leaves, twigs, etc., are before long buried beneath the accumulated castings of worms, and are thus brought into a more or less decayed state within reach of the roots of the plants. The leaves, which are dragged into the burrows as food, are being torn into the finest shreds, partially digested and saturated with intestinal and urinal secretions, and are commingled with much earth. This earth forms the dark-coloured rich humus, which almost everywhere covers the surface of the land with a fairly well-defined layer or mantle. In short, the fertile topsoil of the earth's surface, on which human life entirely depends, is the work of three agencies: disintegrated rock, decomposed vegetation and fungi, bacteria, and earthworms. What the worms deposit is compost, containing all the plant food needed. In fact, the whole surface of the soil passes through their bodies in a few years, while in breaking down vegetable matter, they bring into play their calciferous glands to neutralize humic acid. They ventilate, they oxygenate, and they drain. The plant loves their tunnels for extending its root system. Tests by the Connecticut Experimentation Station in 1943 disclosed that worm castings contain nitrogen 5 times more abundant than in the top spit of an average soil, phosphates 7 times, potash 11 times, and magnesium 3 times. The total humic content of these castings is 40% greater. So to call the earthworms the ploughs of God is a well-chosen expression, and to kill them is suicide. Mr. Stuart Remington, the well-known chemist and writer of textbooks for agricultural colleges, was good enough to send me an extract on earthworms from a chapter in a book of his not yet published. Here are a few lines of it. The excessive use the excessive use of artificial manures is undoubtedly destructive to worm life, and this again reacts on the bird life of a district, driving many useful birds who are friends of both agricultural and horticultural workers to seek more congenial feeding grounds near the banks of rivers and streams. On our ordinary garden soils there may be 50,000 worms per acre. The seeds of trees and plants are also carted down by worms. And many of these seeds germinate, adding to the organic matter of the soil. If then certain chemicals and factory byproducts expel or destroy the earthworms, they are breaking a link in the chain of fertility and creation that neither man nor earth can do without. That is rather powerful stuff, I think. The importance, therefore, of those earthworms are so paramount to our survival as a species, to be able to feed ourselves with the necessary nutrients and minerals that we need, that we gain from the plants that we grow, that anybody, as he says, using these pesticides to kill them on their farm are killing the human species, which is another reason why we shouldn't be taking and eating supermarket food, in my opinion. That is very powerful. That is very, very powerful. We've come to the end of that chapter. We are now approaching chapter 9. Always move worms away from the trowel, out of harm's way, and feel very bad if I accidentally chop one in two, says Audrey Forbes. John F. says, a relative of mine wrote a book, The Story of the British Annelids, in 1924. Michael White says the New Zealand flatworm is killing our worms off and destroying soil ecology. Is it? Where does that come from, the flatworm? Linda Kane, extract of earthworms, yummy. Don't eat our earthworms, Linda. Julia says you're reading very well, which doubled with the content is very moving. You're telling me it's I have got very emotional reading this book. Who or what, and I'm not a religious man by any means, but made me pick The Wisdom of the Fields. Whatever power is in there is I'm so pleased. Right, let's get a grip and continue. Chapter 9, The Good Husbandman. And a quote here from Lord Northbourne in a book, presumably, Look to the Land. Agriculture is, or should be, the greatest of the crafts. And having read thus far, I cannot disagree. My next example of organic farming comes from the borders of Wiltshire and Berkshire. It is not traditional, but experimental farming, not a heritage, but a novelty. It is, in short, pure pioneering, and develops the tradition of husbandry in new ways without deliberately aiming to do so. It restores that tradition because the farmer discovered that good husbandry was the only practical way to farm. Though I lack the opportunity of personally visiting the farm, I gathered part of my data over the lunch table with the farmer and the rest of the kind offices of Sir Albert Howard. They are significant of the springs of the new life that, under the impetus of war and economic disaster, are forcing their slow way through the dead volcanic crust of the present. My friend Sykes I don't think he means Eric Sykes with the plank, but who knows, began as a specialist in the breeding of prize Friesians and Berkshire pigs. He belonged to what I may call the denier class, where beasts are figured in the farming papers standing, as it were, under a shower of gold. He was a kind of guinea king in the number of expensive cups he had won at the shows, not only for his dairy cattle, but for his championship pigs, but for his thoroughbred racehorses. He was just one of those samurai you read about with gaping awe or ironic entertainment in that book of distorted agricultural history called Great Farmers. Then came the shock. The accredited milk scheme was started, and he was asked to submit a herd as proud as the celebrated son-kin of Hercules to the tuberculin test. In the most superior herd of the 3 counties, 66% were found to be infected. Contrary to popular opinion, a good farmer is the most adaptable of men, almost too much so when you consider how the mid-Victorian farmers swallowed the bait of the Teutonic Liebig, the inventor of artificial manures. And, oh yes, this is Liebig, or Liebig, was a German, I think, and he invented the beginning of the artificial manures. And it's interesting because it's only interesting in a sort of whimsical irony that if you look at his name Liebig and you take the first 3 letters L-E-I and you reverse the I and the E, you get lie, and then you take the second half of his name big, lie, big, that we need these artificial. To me, it was in the name that he was lying right from the start. Anyway, I've lost the thread of that sentence. So, contrary to popular opinion, a good farmer is the most adaptable of men, almost too much when you consider how the mid-Victorian farmers swallowed the bait of the Teutonic Liebig, the inventor of artificial manures. And so this farmer began to wonder what was amiss. Was it the imported concentrates which automatically produced those good galloners with their milk spate records? Was it the mechanization which was responsible for the loss of stamina and constitution? Why did cows make greedily for common wayside weeds on their way to the milking shed? He would only be able to unravel this knotty enigma by reversing the whole modern theory of milk production, so beneficial to the soap and oil combines by the demand for their byproducts, so favoured by authority and the darling of orthodox science. He would try nature's way and put ordinary good health and constitution before the quantitative assessment of living things. So, the Frisian herd was sold off and Channel Islanders were installed in their stead. It should be noted in parenthesis that the Channel Islands cattle are, on their own islands, among the hardiest and most disease-free cattle in the world. Scott took them to the North Pole and the Americans to Alaska and Panama by a traditional system of breeding and feeding. At about this time, nature sent up another danger signal. His most valuable breeding mare went down with a contagious aberration, and he was advised to shoot her. With the true farmer's combination of instinct with experiment, he put her out to grass for 2 years on a paddock that had never been treated with inorganic manures. She recovered, lived to 21, and bred 4 perfect foals even. She was cured neither by the knacker's yard nor doses of superstition from a bottle, but solely by humus-rich grass. Another thread in this design of repentance was woven by a meeting with a well-known downland farmer who, high up on the thin chalk, was growing heavier crops of grass and clovers than the best farmers could do in the lowlands. Inspired by this heretic, our farmer took the plunge. He sold his exhibition farm that was worth £100 an acre and brought another chalk farm on the 800 feet contour line that was worth £4 an acre. The general view that it was not farming land at all, but just space out of doors. This stuff, what in a limestone region would be called brash, was first subsoiled to a depth of 2 feet, was ploughed and harrowed several times, cleaned and heavily rolled over twice. The Channel Islanders were folded onto the old turf by the hosier open bale system. This is precisely the same as that of the traditional hurdled sheep, a system, that is to say, of controlled intensive organic manuring, which, when the sod is ploughed up, sets going a kind of sheet composting by the interaction through the bacterial ferment between the decaying turf and the evenly distributed dung and urine. Neither farmyard muck nor artificials of any kind were used because the formation of humus took place on the spot as it does on a woodland floor. The pioneer followed this up by 2 further measures, both of them putting the clock back in the first instance by a mere couple of generations, and in the second by centuries. One was the adoption of mixed grazing in addition to that of the Channel Islanders, who had replaced the oversized prize winners stuffed with concentrates. The other grazers were sheep and geese, and it struck me at once when I learned this that there has been only one institution in our agricultural history which relied on cattle, sheep and geese to retain its vitality. This, of course, was the cooperative common of the open field village, the special target of derision and contempt for the up-to-date agricultural expert, whether in office or laboratory. Only to mention sheep and geese today is to invoke retrospective musings. The experts never pause to ask why, if these commons of the old villages were the muddled wilderness propaganda painted them, was there so demand for them during the time of the enclosures? At any rate, by grazing cattle, sheep and geese over this upland pastures and ploughing them up, Mr. Sykes got 20 tons of dung and urine per acre and took 18 sacks of wheat per acre, or 2.5 times the national average. After sowing his new farm with 3 corn crops in wartime, he then reseeded them to a 4 years' lay with 21 pounds of the usual mixture, but fescues, timothy, dog's tail and meadow grass added to it, together with 35 pounds of various legumes and deep-rooting plants like sainfoin, chicory, burnet and kidney, vetch, nature's own subsoilers. The result was that when the lay was ploughed up, there was enough surplus of humus, however you pronounce it, not only for 2 root breaks and a couple of corn crops to follow, but for the rich new sward in the next round of rotation. In 1943, he took from 2 to 3 tons per acre from it and from 1 to 2 tons above the average of good meadowland. He has also converted all the unused straw on the farm by treading with his increased stock and added green waste from the hedges to make a rich compost, mechanically watered and distributed. If all England was so farmed, what is the limit to the population England might support, and without using any handful of chemicals? By this deep-rooting lays, my acquaintance has been putting the clock back, not quite as far as that of the mixed grazing, namely to Robert Eliot's now celebrated Clifton Park experiment, and Eliot died in 1914. Eliot converted exhausted and derelict hillside land in Roxburghshire to the highest productivity by laying it down to a 4-year lay of deep-rooting grass and legumes like those of this contemporary farmer. For them, he took in his first season 2 tons of hay per acre, and an aftermath, establishing afterwards a regular rotation of superfine corn and root crops, alternately without using a single ounce of artificial manures. The land, grazed off by sheep, became so exceedingly fertile through the penetrating, aerating and humus-forming qualities of these deep-rooting plants that this typical yeoman was able to discard even the phosphates that he had first used on his roots. And Eliot didn't mince his words about the practice of chemical manuring. He called it the decadence of farming. The land that was worth £4 an acre is now worth £40 an acre. When this farmer first started on his downland farm, he lost £2,000 worth of livestock by disease. By the methods I've described, he has rid his farm of all disease, increased the stamina of his stock, and has built up a large tuberculosis-free, home-bred dairy herd. The moral of it all? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and of that fear, authentic husbandry is the reflection. By golly. By golly. I remember somebody saying to me at some point when I started to talk about land and wanting to grow land that I had a old-fashioned view of farming, and I looked at things through rose-tinted glasses. I can't remember who made the comment, but somebody made it to me on a YouTube video. And I remember asking myself, I wonder if that's true. Do I have an old-fashioned romantic? And yet, you see through this and through others that, I mean, we've been farming for 10,000 years. Somebody said to me, yes, but, you know, I think it was Matthew Holdsworth, actually, who said this. He said, yes, but, you know, we've only been managed to cling on to it. We've only been managing to cling on to it. It's only in the 80 years we've made it, you know, possible to predict and grow and all the rest of it. And I just thought, well, that is absolute, utter, complete rubbish. No disrespect to him whatsoever, but he's not a farmer. He doesn't know and probably hasn't read a lot about farming. And I'm only beginning to read it, so I can't say I'm an expert in any shape or form either. But if this is to be believed, and why would we doubt it, the secret of great farming, the quality of the food, the nutrients, it's there. And we have been conditioned to assume that science and hugely mechanized way of farming, getting people off the land and using machines and ridding the soil of its fertility because we can artificially put it back in temporarily to grow a crop that has no minerals and nutrients in it, and then do it all over again, is the right way. We've been conditioned to think that. This is so, you know, totally wrong. And the way that these farmers described in here, who look after their animals and treat them as friends and give them the respect that animals actually deserve, and then they reward us so beautifully, it's clearly the right way forward. Let's see what you are saying in the comments. Not very much here. I guess that's either because you're concentrating on the reading and you're not so bored by it. The flatworms feed on earthworms, says Linda Kane. May have arrived here in early 60s, apparently. Bloody 60s. Hello, just listening to this emotional reading. Quite good. Says, just quite good. Yeah, quite good. Not very good, just quite good. Quite is such a horrible word, isn't it? Isn't that a horrible word? Oh, it's quite good. But you can always say it's quite good. It's got a sort of double-edged meaning, isn't it? I always think when people say it's quite good, I always look like, oh, okay. I did try. I put earthworm in my flower gardens every spring. Good for you. What a quite good idea that is. Linda says, I definitely have noticed less earthworms in my garden. Well, let's hope we're not poisoning them out. I do too, says Cynthia. That is why I started buying them. My flowers do much better. There you go. Sulfate of ammonia works in reverse if overused. Well known. We play for high stakes, says Graham Cass. And Morton says, sorry I'm late. We have just had notice that the Spanish Prime Minister wants folk here to voluntarily download a COVID track and trace app. Thin end of the wedge. Be warned, it'll come to you. Well, we can download it voluntarily, which means you don't have to, I guess. Cynthia Pate says, oh, no, I meant very good. I meant very, very good. Thank you. I didn't think for a moment you were being that way. I was just pulling your leg because you can go quite, as I say, it's a funny word, quite, isn't it? Yeah, it's quite good. Well, what does that mean? Do you mean it's quite good? Quite good. I always think that's a funny word. How are we doing? We've got a few more minutes. Let's see, where can we go to? We've got a page and a half. Shall we just crack on with the last bit? Why not? See if we get on. There's another section here. My next example is not of an individual, but a community. Not of men, but boys. It reveals the integral association between organic farming and self-subsistence. Here again, tradition is left behind. The experiment had no guidance from the past at all. Those who partook it were devoid of agricultural experience, training, or inherited aptitude. Only by chance did they even live in the country. Faith, determination, and a sense of right action were their mentors. They not only succeeded, but a traditional husbandman would have found nothing in this great enterprise to disquiet him. Before the spirit of boyhood is ground by the mills of manhood, wise leadership can educe from the former a pattern for living the latter has lost. Educe. Not heard that word before. What does that mean? St. Columbia's College is a small public school of 150 boys among the Dublin Hills, which has become self-supporting, or nearly so, in the food it eats. If only more schools would do that. Can you imagine? In the words of its warden, Mr. C.W. Soby, or Soby, I think, there can be no question... Oh, he's Irish, isn't he? Because it's in the Dublin Hills. There can be no question that children everywhere should be educated to love the land which nourishes them, and in that, in turn, nature will unfold to them a million secrets of the way of plants, animals, and birds, and of the soil itself. As a self-supporting community, this college is a true development of those primitive ones founded by the British saints in the Dark Ages. The experiment was launched, as all pioneering without previous experience should be, from small beginnings. The college has a farm of its own that began some 5 years ago with a few pigsties and poultry houses. The boys then built more of them, and the college took 4 acres of arable, then 14, then 42, and grew wheat, oats, and potatoes. At this time, there was a shortage of oats in Ireland, wherefore a licence was obtained to equip a local mill which ground the oats cultivated by the school. This was by far the most important step of all. It integrated soil with food, the fields with the house, husbandry with nutrition. The need for fertilizers was fulfilled not by applying to the factory, but by purchasing 15 milch cows and 42 sheep, while the poultry was increased to 30. By 1943, 42 acres were in cultivation, and by the next year the acreage was extended into the 200s. The college possesses its own equipment. Horses and bees have been added. There is a large vegetable garden in a 3.5-acre field that has been devoted to soft fruit. All the meat is killed and cured on the premises, and practically the whole college takes part on a voluntary basis in farm operations. There are 5 paid hands with 20 boys to assist and learn of them. The rest of the college taking part in group jobs at peak seasons. A kind of court leet of masters, boys and regular workers meets at several intervals to discuss the farm programme. This healthy experiment has roused the enthusiasm of the boys, and the practical results have been so successful that a general weekly lecture has been given on agricultural theory and practice. It includes in its curriculum not only the routine issues of cropping, tillage, stock breeding, dairying and rotations, but, and here I open my eyes wide, of deforestation, soil erosion, green manuring and compost making. Is there any specialised agricultural college in all of the British Isles that instills into its pupils the knowledge of composting and soil erosion? The interesting thing here is that the experiment did not begin theoretically or on a priori principle at all. It began by doing things. Only after the farm had become a running concern, paying its own way and virtually supporting itself, did biological and other scientific explorations occupy the college. The boys who attend the lecture room know how to plough, to make butter, to keep bees, to manage horses, to pit brewers' grain, to lay hedges, to clean ditches, to crush and mill oats, to practice forestry. They've planted 1,600 trees, to shepherd the flock, to do smithying and carpentrying, to recondition the outhouses as workshops, to build a road, and even to run a printing press. This is the way to learn, to make instruction and mental exercise part of a good life. This realistic avoidance of specialisation is maintained by preventing the farm work from interfering with the normal games and classes of the college. There is plenty of voluntary labour, and abundant labour is the secret of all good farming, but it is spare time work, and so hard work because the spirit is willing. I have said that this public school farm is almost entirely self-supporting, and no farm can be so except on the principle of the rule of return. The farm is kept in fertility by composting, and the greatest energy and resourcefulness are devoted to it. No chemical fertilizers are used, and 50 tons of compost are made in the year, on the principle of Sir Albert Howard's indoor process. Ditchings, vegetable residues, leaves, thistles and nettles all find their way into the generating stations of humus. The warden said in his letter that the neighbourhood was rich in weeds. This expression pleased me. For the boys to collect, it's rich in weeds for the boys to collect for the compost heaps. They even make silt traps for it on the mountainside. On a gorse-covered field of 5.5 acres, they raised 50 tons of potatoes. What is more, The health of the boys, together with their proficiency in schoolwork, has improved by leaps and bounds. Thus has been fulfilled the words of Dr. Bircher Benner in Food Science for All. In youth, too, even among children, you will find suffering enough arising from the same causes, bad nutrition, and many of the results, moreover, will be hidden from the observer, since they affect the invisible mental life, whose tragedy is greater the less one can or will see it. All these sufferings are the consequences, direct or indirect, of the many years of sin of nutrition arising from appetite, error, or ignorance. And all these sufferings can be avoided, cured, or alleviated by a healthy nourishment. That is so very important when it comes to supermarket bloody foods. And nearly at the end of this, an inspector said he had never before seen such healthy complexions. An inward resistance had been built up against infectious disease. And when other schools, and I quote here from the warden's letter to me, have had influenza by the 30s and 40s, our sanatorium has not had more than 3 or 4. COVID patients have never turned up. I added that just for fun. The college used to have many epidemics in the pre-farming and pre-composting days. Now it has none. Self-supporting in the daily needs and the actualities of college life, the farm has also become so financially self-supporting. Its earliest venture was made possible by a loan of £32. By selling its produce at market prices, it's not only balanced its books, but brought out of its sales the whole of its machinery and equipment. This includes a silo, a cream separator, and a churn, the mill, and the stock. Such an experiment is true pioneering. By practicing the new science, the college gives a coherent and rational interpretation of a pre-scientific husbandry, obtaining its results from intuition and observation. By advancing beyond and out of anti-traditional bias of our times, it recovers the rural tradition in a new form. Perhaps the only way we shall recover sanity in living, vitality in nutrition, husbandry in farming, a right use of the land, and a pattern of behaviour in conformity with the rhythms of nature is by experiments such as this one. Individuals and groups, that is to say, will disembarrass themselves so far as possible from disintegrated and devitalized modes of living, and build up new and real lives of their own. The example of Saint Columba himself and countless of his fellow saints in wild and barren places is before them. And that, at 2 minutes to go till 5 o'clock, is where we will finish. Every time we read this, it just gets better and better and more worrying and scary for the modern way that we are living and the way that we're farming. I am inspired and also disheartened at the same time. It's a tragedy of the modern era that we don't do this. Let's just have a quick look at what you've got. We already have the app hidden on the phone. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Let's go back. Morton says, I'm late. Yes, I meant very good. Okay. That's the trouble with text, Cynthia. You don't hear the inflection. We already had an app hidden on our phones. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. A shortage of oats, not something Morton ever suffers from. Linda Kane says, I think many schools used to have attached farms for the pupils to get experience. All gone, no doubt. No space on the curriculum, and the land sold off for housing. Yes. Edward Moulding, changing the food system to create more market for local produce requires the support of customers who buy and consume the produce, even if they do not drive change. A quote there from Professor Tim Benton. Interesting. Similar fate befell sports fields. Yes, true. One good reason for schools, says Joss Stick. If only they would do it. Linda Kane says, I'm wrong. Just read that there are more than 120 schools with farms in the UK, including Lancing College and Oat Hall in Haywards Heath. There are more 120. Not farms on that scale that he's just described, surely. Or that they do a little bit of, they have an allotment. Is that what you mean? I can't believe it. When we were at school, we had gardening classes, says Edward Moulding. Yeah, I mean, he's talking about running an actual farm that has financial, that they've bought all the machinery and the milk tron, and they make the cheeses, and they have animals, and they have mixed grazing, and geese. Poultry, he said, didn't he? Michael White, we are immediately switching to non-Android phones and turning off the Bluetooth to try and stymie it. Oh, the app you're talking about is the voluntarily downloading the Trace app. Yeah, well, the thing to do is to turn your bloody phone off, isn't it? Good to show you are what you eat, says Mike Stephen. Absolutely. Thanks for reading the book. Excellent. Thank you, Sean Lavick. Excellent, Richard. Good reading. Thank you very much. Brilliant book. Just better than I thought. Better than I really thought. What can I say? Moving, emotional experience, frightening, and at the same time encouraging. That's why I want a piece of land. This is exactly why I want a piece of land. What was that quote? There was that quote that I read quickly just before we go. Well, agriculture is, as should be, the greatest of crafts by Lord North. That was that quote, but. Was it the Irish guy? There was a quote that we had. But in essence, it was everybody. The best thing that anyone can do is to be able to grow food. I think was what they were saying, and in my 2 up, 2 down house with a yard that's got no space in it and no light. It's I feel resentment that I am unable to do this, and I don't want an allotment. I don't want people keep saying, "Oh, Richard, get I don't want a bloody allotment, a little allotment. I want a chunk of land to do, not just for me, but to share this chunk of land with other people to grow and do something really great and show to the world it's possible. Even in my mid-50s, what a time to start learning. What a time. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming along, and every day this has just been like an open university and opening my eyes and challenging my thoughts. It's been fantastic, and I hope you enjoy it. I'll be back tomorrow for the end of this week, and we'll go a little further into this amazing book. Take care, look after yourselves, and I will see you tomorrow. Until then, thanks for coming. Thanks, Julia, for looking after the chat room. Thank you for all your comments, and thank you for listening. And take care, and bye-bye. Bye-bye.